Okay, today we're going to learn Eruvin Daf Ayin Zayin. Today's daf is Ayin Zayin, which spells out in Hebrew Oz, and it's dedicated by Shelley and Jerry Gornish in memory of Oz Wilczek, Zichrono Livracha. Our Oz, our beloved, our greatly missed grandson. Okay, with that, we will get started for today. We're going to review the Mishnah from Ayin Vav Amud Bet, okay, just to get started, because that's the basis for what we're doing. I'm going to use the share screen more with our charts, and that will help us to kind of organize the daf today. Okay, we'll switch back between that and the pictures. Okay, if you look back at the Mishnah, there's 4 basic cases, okay, or 3, and what I specifically put just so it makes it clear, there's 2 different topics going on in the Mishnah, and this is going to be, I would say, a little bit confusing when the Gemara moves in. I'll talk about it in a minute, but let's just go through the cases and then I'll discuss. So the first situation is a kotel that's between 2 chatzerot, okay? It's between 2 courtyards, and you have a wall. It's 10 high and 4 wide. That's our classic Rishut HaYachid, as we've discussed in the past. So now we have the halacha is ma'arvin shnayin ve'ein ma'arvin echad. They make an eruv together, or they can make an eruv, I'm sorry, Shmarvin Shnai means 2 independent ones, or they can make an eruv together. If Hayu B'Rosho Peirot, if at the top of the wall were fruit sitting there, then we have another issue. Now, the first issue is, can we view these as together? Since it's wide enough that they all have access to it, so we can view them that they can actually make an eruv together. But there's another issue, which is, what if there's fruits at the top? So so each one can go up and access the top because it's its own Rishut Yachid. So they can go up and eat the fruits at the top, but what can't they do? They can't bring them down because there's the Chatzer, another Chatzer, and a Rishut Yachid in the middle. You can't carry from one to the other because it's its own separate Rishut. Now the question is going to be, what if it's narrower than 4? Then are you allowed to? Right? The assumption is if it's narrower, it's not its own reshut, and each chatzer can have access to it. But we're going to have to see, and that's going to be an issue that's going to be the major focus of most of the Gemara today, which is when can the sides, the chatzerot on the side, carry to the top? Nifritza hakotel. What if the kotel breaks? Okay, it falls down, it comes apart. So if it's ad eser amod until 10 amod, then marvin shnayim v'imratzu marvin echad b'pnei shu kepetach. But yoter mikam marvin echad ve'em marvin shnayim. Once it's a very big breach, then already you don't have both options. Then at that point you're considered one, and you can't carry all together. Okay, that's the Gemara until now. Now that's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara starts off and says, Ein bo arba amai. What if you don't have 4 tvachim width? So now what? And again, like I said, the focus is going to be, can each of the sides carry? We're now not talking about eruv, and it's going to be a little bit unclear. Does the Gemara actually go back to discussing eruv in today's daf? And it seems to me like at some point they do, and I'll show you, I'll point out where. But it seems like until then, the major focus of the Gemara is going to be carrying or using this wall. Who gets to use this wall? In what case? What's the situation? So once it's more than 4, the only thing we allow you to do is use the top of the wall, because the top of the wall is its own domain, because it's 10 high, 4 by 4 wide. What if it's narrower than 4? Then what's the halacha? Now, again, I'm going to show you the chart. And if you see in the chart, we basically have a machloket Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. And the focus, the structure is going to be like this. Each is going to give an answer, what they think happens regarding carrying up if it's less than 4 wide, 4 handbreadths wide. Then we're going to have a question of Rabbi Yochanan. We're going to answer it and then say that Rabbi Yochanan goes according to his own opinion that's quoted elsewhere. Then we're going to question Rav based on that, because shouldn't that be everybody? Shouldn't Rav agree with that? And then we're going to give an answer. So that's our basic structure for the next section. Okay, so let's read. Ein bo arba amai, amar Rav, avir shtei reshiyot sholetet bo, and therefore lo yaziz bo afilu meloni ma. Rav says, if you have this wall in between, and it's 10 high, which means it's very high, right? That's a machitza. And it's not 4 wide. Well, guess what? Even though it's very high, really, everybody has access to it. But the fact that everyone has access to it messes it up for the other, because it means it's mine and it's yours. And what do we have then? The 2 chatzerot both have reshut there, and they don't have an eruv together. So therefore, no one's allowed to actually use that space at all. That's what Rav says. Rabbi Yochanan Amal, now, I'm not going to explain to you his real reasoning yet, because otherwise you won't understand the question of the Gemara. Okay, so I'm going to kind of give you not all the information right now. And I'll tell you how the Gemara seems to understand Rabbi Yochanan at first. What Rabbi Yochanan says is, no, each one can bring it up, okay, can bring food. That's more than the Mishnah allowed in the case where it was 4 by 4 wide. Remember, if it was 4 wide, then not 4 by 4, sorry, 4 wide. If it was 4 wide, we said it's its own Rishut Yachid. And if they're up at the top of the wall, everyone can actually use it. But he's going to say now, we're assuming he just basically doesn't agree with Rav's approach that avir shtei rishiyot, that means the airspace belongs to both. He doesn't really think that because it's already 10 high. So it's almost like nobody has any rishut there. Now, if it's no man's land, then he seems to say, well, if it's no man's land, then I can carry my stuff up and you can carry yours. Not just that we can use the top, but we can each carry items up. So the Gemara is going to question that based on our Mishnah. Tanan, they basically, if it was 4 wide, we'd have the same thing, that we both have access to the top, right? But in the Mishnah, it said we only have access to the top because nobody really owns it. In the Mishnah, we said it's because it's a Rishut Yachid. Here we have a bit of a problem. It's not exactly Rishut Yachid, but we'll get back to that. We're kind of ignoring that fact right now. But they're basically saying, Tanan, it says in our Mishnah, Elu olim mikam v'ochlin, ve'elu olim mikam v'ochlin. Each side can go up to the top and eat up at the top, but olin in ma'alin lo. It sounds like you can only go up, but you can't pick items and put them up on top. So now you can't take anything from your domain and put it up on top. So the fact that it's now less than 4, that's all of a sudden going to allow us to carry things up. They're basically saying is if you don't think that each one is forbidding the other, because you're obviously letting people use that space, then it should be able to be used the same way it was in the Mishnah. Why are you making a distinction between the case in the Mishnah and here about allowing them to bring things up when in the Mishnah it was only allowed to be used at the top of there? So the Gemara is going to now answer, Hachi Kama. This is what he means to say. Yesh bo arba'a al-arba'a olin in ma'alin lo. As we understood the Mishnah correctly, if it's really not 4 by 4, but if it means if the width is 4, right, and the height is 10, then olin in ma'alin lo. Then you're only allowed to carry up, use it up top, and you can't carry any items up. Because remember, what did we say? And this now we're going to move into it, all has to do with domains. That's called a Rishut Yachid. Therefore, it's its own separate entity. Each of the chatzerot do not have access. However, ein bo arba'a al-arba'a ma'alin nami. Now, why is that? Because this is what we call a makom p'tur, an exempt space. Remember a makom p'tur? We discussed this in Masechet Shabbat and also in Eruvin, which is it's one of the 4 domains, and it's a space that, for example, okay, and I'll specifically use this example. Normally, we say, let's say you're in a house, and then there's this space, often we call a fire hydrant a makom p'tur, right? It's something that doesn't have the criteria of a Rishut Yachid and isn't Rishut HaRabim and isn't a Carmelit, right? It's smaller than the average. Usually it doesn't have 4 by 4 width. In order to be a Carmelit, it has to have 4 by 4 width, has to be something significant. This is not significant enough. And right, it doesn't have, to be a Rishut Yachid, you would need 10. To be a Carmelit, you would need 4 by 4, right? A Carmelit can be even less than 10, but it would have to have 4 by 4 width. So this is less than 4, so it's not a Carmelit and it's not a Rishut Yachid. We call it a makom p'tur, which means literally an exempt space. That means if I want to carry from my house to an exempt space, I can. If I want to carry from Rishut HaRabim, a public domain, to the makom p'tur, I can. Let's say my house, I have my house, a makom p'tur, and Rishut HaRabim. I can take from, right, people can take from the public space and put there. I can take from my space and put there. What am I not allowed to do? I can't use it to move something from my private domain to the public. I can't say, oh, I'm putting it here, I'm exempt, and now I'm moving it to the next space. That you can't do. But you can put from one domain into the makom p'tur. So therefore, comes Rabbi Yochanan, he says, that's exactly our case. This is lower than 10. I'm sorry, this is 10, but it's narrower than 4. Therefore, each side is allowed to bring up. They can't switch and put one item from here on the other side, again, right, assuming they don't have an eruv. And therefore, right, they can't have an eruv because there's a wall of 10 tvachim, right, so they can't. So now they're going to say, Va'azda Rabbi Yochanan l'tameh. He goes according to his opinion. Dechi'ata Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came from Israel, remember we mentioned him the other day, he used to bring the Torah of Israel to the Babylonians. So he said, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, here we're going to have our halacha, Makom she'em bo arba'a al-arba'a mutar lebnei reshut harabim ubnei reshut yachid lekatef alav. If you have a space that's less than 4 by 4, even if it's 10 high, the people in the public domain and the people in the private domain can put items on it. Remember lekatef, Katef comes from your shoulder. They can take their burdens off their shoulder and, right, my bag's really heavy. I could take it off and put it right there because it's called a makom p'tur. So therefore I'm allowed. Ubelvad shelo yachlifu. And that's what we said before. As long as you don't use it as a go-between to move an item from public to private or private to public. So now, okay, as I showed you in the chart, let's just go back to that chart. As I showed you in the chart, we had a machlok at Rabbi Yochanan. We questioned Rabbi Yochanan. We answered it. Now we said Rabbi Yochanan goes according to his approach. But now we're going to say, what do you mean? This whole issue of a makom p'tur, everybody agrees with. So now we're going to question Rav about this. The Rav, lately, Rav Dimi, what? Rav doesn't hold by Rav Dimi about a makom p'tur. Why wouldn't Rav allow each of them to bring their items up on top here based on the fact that it's a makom p'tur? It doesn't have four. So he answers a very interesting answer. He says, if it was rishiyota oraita, I would allow it. As I mentioned earlier, and that's why I specifically talked to you about if you take something from private to a makom p'tur, and then there's Rishut Rabim on the other side, we're not concerned. Why? Because it's forbidden me to oraita. So we're not concerned that I'm going to take this item and move it into the public domain. However, our case is an issue of derabanan, right? Right? If it was b'rishiyota oraita hachinami, Rav would actually allow it if on one side it was public domain and on the other side was this chatzer and in the middle was a wall that was 10 tefachim tall, less than 4 wide. It's a makom p'tur, you can put it, no problem. Each one can bring items up there because we're not worried that they're going to go bring it accidentally to the other side because everybody knows from Rishut Rabim to Rishut Yachid is forbidden and therefore there's no way they're going to do it. But in our case, what are we discussing? Rishuyot Rabbanan. It's forbidden to take an item. Really, it's permitted from chatzer to chatzer. And right, okay, I didn't want to bring this up, but maybe I should bring it up. This is all not according to Rabbi Shimon. Remember, Rabbi Shimon allows chatzer to chatzer. Okay, remember that whole thing? He says you can carry from your gag to your roof to the other roof, and you carry from courtyard to courtyard. If we're talking about Rabbi Shimon, this would be allowed entirely. There wouldn't even be an issue. But we're talking not like Rabbi Shimon. Okay, or else you could say we're talking about Rabbi Shimon, but we're talking about moving items from your house to the wall. Okay, because items from, even according to Rabbi Shimon, you can only move items that were in your courtyard. So according to Rabbi Shimon, you can't move items from your house, and then maybe we're talking about items from your house. The hard part about saying it's not Rabbi Shimon is we actually paskin like Rabbi Shimon. So therefore, to say maybe what we're discussing is not moving items from your courtyard to the other courtyard, or to the wall, but moving items from your house to the wall, and that would be forbidden. And then the reason is, Chachamim asu chizuk l'divrehem yoter mishel Torah. It's a fascinating line. Normally we say that we're going to be much more stringent when it comes to deoraita, to Torah law, because we're worried if somebody accidentally goes over Torah law, that's much worse than to Rabbanit. This line or this rule says the opposite. And there's also a lot of logic to it. Now, you can understand the logic of safek deoraita l'chumra, safek deRabbanan l'kula, right? If it's rabbinic law, so we'll be more lenient. If it's Torah law, we'll be more stringent. But the logic here is that when the rabbis instituted, so theoretically, this is a private domain of my chatzer, and yours is your own private domain, and we really can carry from one to the other by Torah law. But the rabbis said, no, you can't, because they were worried if we allow carrying like that, we'll end up carrying in other places. And therefore, they said that we're worried if we allow one to carry to the makom p'tur, they might, because it's only rabbinic law, they might actually carry that item to the other side. And that's forbidden by rabbinic law. And because they were worried that people might not be so careful, because people don't take rabbinic laws seriously, therefore they forbade even the makom p'tur in between two rishuyot hayachid. And that's Rav's position. Rabbi Yochanan thinks it's okay. But Rav's position is the rabbis saw a need to strengthen their halacha of not moving from domain to domain, and therefore didn't even allow one carrying to a makom p'tur that's situated in between two private domains. Okay, so that's why they have an argument basically about this. Okay, now we're going to move, to the next chart on the page. Pull up the chart. The next chart is going to be, we're now going to have two different people who bring a law, a situation with a wall, or maybe not a wall, we'll see, something in between two courtyards. They're going to describe what the law is. Then they're going to give the reason for the law, which, as you can see from the chart, is the same for both. And then they're going to say, well, if the reason is the same for both, what do you need each of these separate laws? Why do you need each of these laws to have been said separately? Okay, and that's going to be the structure of the next little section. So now the Gemara says, one second. Okay, now the Gemara says, let's look at our next case. Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna. Rabba bar Rav Huna says, there's a little mistake in the text there. It should be Rabba, the son of Rav Huna says, Amar Rav Nachman, in the name of Rav Nachman. Kotel shebein shtei chatzerot, tzido echad gavoa 10 tvachim. Okay, now we're going to pull up pictures. So if I have a wall between two chatzerot, sorry, you can see there's a ton of pictures today. It actually really helps. We're in picture number 249. Very often you have a situation where there's two houses next to each other, but the ground level of one is higher than the ground of the other. So that's going to be our next two cases. You have a wall between two courtyards. Tzido echad gavoa 10 tvachim, v'tzido echad shava la'aretz. One side is 10 tvachim high, because that's the lower side. But the wall on the other side and the neighbor is actually going to be this. Actually, I have this with my backyard neighbor, one of my neighbors, where this exactly is that they're situated much higher than I am. And for them, it's shaveh la'aretz. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean shaveh la'aretz. Shaveh la'aretz sounds like the top of the wall is flush with the ground, but you can see from this picture, the way most people understand it is, it's just much lower, okay? Because the ground is higher, the wall is much lower. So now, who gets access to this wall? Notnim oto lezeh sheshaveh la'aretz, mishum dahave lezeh tashmisho b'nachat u'lezeh tashmisho b'kasheh. In this case, who gets access to carry onto this wall? The one who has much easier access, the one who the wall is short for, right? The wall is very low. It's much more accessible for that person. And therefore they get to use the wall and the other side doesn't at all. And here's the rule. If you have a situation where for one, it's very accessible and the other, it's very inaccessible. So the one who it's accessible to has the access and not the other. Remember, once it's 10, we call that already inaccessible. 10, I think I saw is about 31 inches. It's really not very high. You have to think about maybe people were shorter in those days. 31 inches is not terribly high to say this isn't so accessible. But in general, we just have to kind of accept that those are the measurements they used. Amar Rav Shizbi, Amar Rav Nachman. Now we're going to have another case that's basically exactly the same, but instead of being a wall, it's going to be a ditch. Okay, that's picture number 250. Okay, so now we have a ditch. Charitz shebein shtei chatzerot. So this is again said in the name of Rav Nachman, but by somebody else. So Rav Shizbi says this in the name of Rav Nachman. The first one was said by Rabba bar Rav Huna in the name of Rav Nachman. Charitz shebein shtei chatzerot. So you have a ditch between two courtyards. Tzido echad amok 10, v'tzido echad shaveh la'aretz. For one, it's 10 because now we have the opposite. The one whose land is much higher, the ground is much higher, right? He has a much deeper, right? The ditch is much deeper for him. But the other side, the ditch is very minor. So the one who it's lower, right, who's more accessible, gets access. So again, it's the same situation as we said just before, that if one has easier access, it will be theirs, it belongs to them, they get access to the ditch, and the other one, who it's not very accessible to, doesn't have access to the ditch. So now the Gemara has to say, why did Rav Nachman say it in both these cases? It seems pretty obvious. Utsriche, you would need to say it why. Since the wall is at a height, you would say, oh, people use things that are high up. But people don't like to bend down and go into this ditch. So because people don't want to bend down and go into the ditch, it's not very accessible. And therefore you would say, now here you have to say what then? Maybe nobody has access because it's so inaccessible. Nobody wants to go deep down into a ditch and go, even if it's not deep, still people don't go down into ditches. So you might say, maybe there's no access to anybody. So now you could say, okay, so then say it in a ditch. A ditch is not so accessible, and yet we still give one side access. So obviously it would be the same in a wall case. So now they say, no, something else about a wall. Nobody's scared about using a ditch. You're not going to, right? The ditch is not so deep, so you're not worried about falling in. But but people don't like climbing up on things. You might fall. And therefore you might think, maybe nobody's considered as having access to this wall because they might fall. Tzricha. Okay, the story that comes into my mind about this is I had a situation where a neighbor's internet wasn't working, and the Bezek, the Bezek is the phone company here, their box where the internet came from happened to be attached to a tree in my garden, which was very inaccessible. Obviously, they put this in many, many years ago when there were not very many trees around and not other things around. Probably wasn't even a wall there, and there's a wall right there, and it was very inaccessible. And they made me cut down the tree so that they could get to the Bezek box. And I was trying to explain to the person, you could just climb on the wall. There's a wall there. It's pretty wide. I didn't check how wide it is. Okay. I think it's 10. Not sure. I would say it's suffix, whether it's 10 tvachim off the ground and 4 tvachim wide. But I basically said it's definitely wide enough. You could stand on it. Why don't you just climb on the wall and get to it that way? And of course he said, I'm not allowed to climb on a wall. It's dangerous. I could fall. I'm not allowed, insurance, all that. Anyway, he wouldn't do it. And we had to cut the tree to give him better access to there so he could actually put a ladder up. So anyway, I thought about that when I thought about this, about people being scared to climb up on walls. So because of that, they had to tell us, no, in any case, we're still going to say that this is accessible. Bala ma'ato. Okay, now we're going to, okay, so these were the two cases. Let's go back to our chart for a quick minute. Okay, if you look at the chart, so we had two halachot. We had the reason, which was the same for both. So then we had to say what's unique about each one. Now we're going to get to a whole bunch of cases, and you can see this chart's going to take us to the end of the page. I'm just kind of running down, and you can see the way the chart is. It gives you a feeling of the structure. Each time we're going to have a case. We're going to say, is this a case where we can make the wall less than 10? We have a wall that's 10, but can we somehow say this wall is going to be accessible even though it's only 10? And then the question is, again, who has access? At some point, it seems like they're going to be switching. And instead of talking about who has access, it's going to be, if we view this as less than 10, can we say that they can make an Eruv between them? Okay, so at some point there seems to be a switch, even though it's not clear from the Gemara that they're all of a sudden switching, but it does seem to be that the Gemara switches, and I'll explain to you where. But at this point, it seems to be the issue is carrying, and can we somehow make the wall lower? And we're going to see all these halachot, whether this is considered lower, this isn't considered lower, and then you can see that in at least all the first cases, there's going to be some sort of, as I called on the sheet, diyun, some sort of discussion about this. Some question, answer. Okay, the second one you see there's a whole bunch. Then we're going to have an explanation and question, answer. So we're going to deal with all these. And then the later cases, we're just going to basically say it as it is. And there's going to be one narrowing of some halacha. Okay, but we're going to basically go into all these cases. I'm going to move now to the pictures because the pictures are going to be useful. Okay, maybe I'll leave it up for one more minute till we get to the pictures. Okay, so here goes the first case. Let's just see where we are. Bala ma'ato. Okay, we're about 15 lines from the bottom. The first word is on the line, or bala ma'ato. Bala ma'ato. Let's say you want to make the wall lower. Now, it's not clear right now how you plan to make the wall lower. There's two ways you can make a wall lower. You can either put some sort of step stool or something that one can stand on. Okay, Rashi says, bala ma'ato. Rashi says in Dibor Matchil Bala Ma'et, it's right in the center of Rashi on the page. Akotel. Okay, it's talking about you want to make the wall lower. And it seems like we're talking about you made a tail afar, you put a mound of dirt, or so right up against the wall, or you built some sort of wooden structure, or you put like a bunch of pieces of wood there that you built up, and you somehow got to a certain, right, you put them up, and that made the wall lower. Again, what does it mean? It doesn't really mean you made the wall lower, but it means that you made the wall more accessible. It's not 10 tfachim away from the ground because you raised the ground. So bala ma'ato, im yesh b'miuto arba'a, if the thing that you put, now we're going to assume it's something you put on the ground, like Rashi says, is 4 wide. Okay, now here there's a debate, Rashi and Tosfot. Rashi says, im yesh l'ma'ato, the next Rashi, arba'a orech b'tzad meshach hakota. Okay, that means, let's see, is there a picture here? That means that you put something on, no, actually they don't show this. I don't know why, but here's a picture. Let's just look at 252, even though it's not the same thing. But let's say it was something like this on the ground. There was 4 tfachim wide, okay? That means that it goes the extent of 4 handbreadths against the wall. It's not 4 by 4 square. It's just a rectangular that's 4 wide. Once something is 4 wide, it already makes it accessible because then you can stand on it, you can use it. Tosfot says, no, 4 wide is not enough. It has to be 4 by 4, okay, where it's much more significant in terms of space that you have to step on it. So there's a machloket Rashi Tosfot. Every time we say 4, do we mean 4 or do we mean 4 by 4? So bala ma'ato, miyesh b'miuto arba'a, mutar l'shtamesh b'kol akotel kulo. So this opinion says, if you have, again, I'm leaving the pictures up, but we're not really up to it yet. If you have 4, right, if the item is 4, let's say this mound of dirt on the ground, then you can use the entire wall. Okay? The whole wall is accessible to you. So let's say we're both on either sides of the, my courtyard's on this side, yours is on the other. I can use because I have some mound of dirt there that's basically allowing me access to the wall. V'im lav, but if I don't, so now if it's 4, I can use the entire wall because we basically say I have 4 to climb up and then I can access anywhere on the wall. But if not, if it's not 4 wide, then I can only use the space that's opposite where I put that mound of dirt. So the Gemara doesn't really understand this. Either way you look at it, it doesn't make any sense. If it works to say I can get access, then even if it's less than 4 tefachim wide, then I should have access to the whole thing. And if 3 is not enough to call this access, then then I shouldn't say that this worked even at the space right opposite, right? If I don't have access, then I don't have access, right? It doesn't help me, right? This isn't 3, less than 3 or less than 4 is just not enough for me to stand on, which means I shouldn't even say that the part right opposite where I'm standing, where I put the mound, is accessible. So it doesn't really make any sense. So Amar Ravina, now we get to our picture, 251. Forget what we thought. It's not a mound on the floor. It's that we took out a chunk of the wall. We knocked out a piece of the wall. So now we say like this. If the piece we knocked out is more than 4 tefachim wide, then that's already a petach. That means the wall is open and accessible. In this part, it would be open and accessible to both sides, right? And then we could each use the wall. But if it's smaller than 3 tefachim, then it's not really usable for much. But it's usable at least, and then it's usable theoretically. If it's less than 4, I can put an object on that opening. You see the picture, right? There's a little indentation in the wall. I could use it to put something there if I wanted. I wanted to store something, I could put something there. It's actually funny. I have a starfruit tree in my yard and the starfruits keep dropping and they constantly fall on the wall in between me and the neighbors. I was thinking exactly that, right? Fruits can sit there and they can land and they kind of just stay there. So there you have, where the wall could be usable for something. But it's not to say that the rest of the wall is accessible, only if it's 4 wide. And this goes back to the beginning of the Masechet where we talked about a mavoy and 4 tefachim is a significant amount of an opening, right? There were debates about is it 4 amot or 4 tefachim, but 4 tefachim could be an amount that we view as an opening. And then we say the whole wall is accessible. But if it's less than that, it can be usable. But just that space is usable, doesn't have any effect on the rest of the wall. Okay, so that's case number 1. So again, we started with a case, how you can make it less, but we didn't really understand it and we had to then explain it in some other way. Same thing is going to be for the upcoming cases. Amar Rav Yechiel, kafa sefel. Okay, that's the next picture that I showed you before. A sefel, it's usually a mug, but here they seem to mean a basin. Take some sort of basin or a pot or something like that, and don't take all the details of the picture right now because that's going to be based on the answer. Right now, we're assuming it's just an upside down basin and you put it on the ground and now you can have access to the top of the wall much more easily. So kafas sefel mima'et, that makes it that your wall is accessible. Again, you can carry to the wall now because it's less than 10 tefachim off the ground. Va'amai, but why? It's davar nital b'shabbatu, v'davar nital b'shabbat eino mima'et. When you want to say that something makes the wall accessible, it has to be something that's going to be there all Shabbat. This goes back to our laws of muktzah and all that about if this is something that I can move on Shabbat, which obviously if I had a basin sitting there, I'm allowed to move the basin. This is not permanent in the slightest. If it's not permanent, then basically I don't really have access to it, right? And this isn't going to consider that I have access to the top of the wall because someone can easily move this and a minute later I won't have access. So therefore, something that is easily movable on Shabbat doesn't make anything better. So what do they answer? It means that you attached it to the ground, in which case to take it out of the ground, what would happen? You would move dirt on the way, and that would be muktzah. So therefore, once you would stick it in the ground, we're going to assume you're not going to be able to move it on Shabbat, because if you would move it, you'd be ending up moving dirt, and that's muktzah. So now the Gemara questions, what do you mean? What does that do for you? Vahatanya, don't worry, you remember learning this Braita, we learned this actually. Pagashi hitmina beteven. If you have a fig that's not ripened, we learned this in Masechet Shabbat, you have an unripe fig. And what do you want to do? In order to help it ripen, you hitmina beteven, you cover it, you bury it in straw. And that kind of keeps it warm and it ripens quicker. The chararash hitmina bekechalim, where you had a cake and you buried it under coals. Im migulem miktsataf, a little bit of it is revealed, you can see it, okay, then nitelet b'Shabbat. You can pick it up. You pick it up by the part that's sticking up. Okay. And then this is what we call tiltu minatzad. The dirt that you're moving is just getting dumped aside, but we don't really care because the item itself, and look at the picture here. Again, this isn't even the final version, but assume that there's some it's kind of in the dirt. When you pick it up, it's not going to really affect anything. It'll move a little dirt aside, but that's not a problem, just like this fig. So the answer, now we get to the picture, di'ile ognim, it has a rim. Okay, because it has a rim on the side, we're assuming before now we didn't think it had a rim. Look at this, it looks kind of like a hat, right? It has a rim on the edges. Now, because it has a rim, what happens? You see that brown stuff? It's a bit of a weird picture. I think I would have drawn it a little differently, but it's buried under a lot of dirt. So in that case already, you're going to move a lot of dirt when you go to pick it up out of the ground. But the Gemara still doesn't like that. So what if it has this rim and it's buried in the ground? We have another Mishnah that's a Mishnah that says, we also learned this. If you bury a radish, it's a turnip or a radish, under a vine, why are you doing this? Okay, it's already grown. It's not like it's a seed or anything. You bury it in the ground to protect it so nobody steals it, or I don't know why, but you bury it in the ground to protect it, maybe to keep it cool in the ground. If some of the leaves are revealed, now the issue of the leaves doesn't really relate to the next three things, so hold off for a minute. Okay, let's talk about that and then we'll get back to our issue. That means I basically buried this radish or turnip in the ground. Assuming while it's in the ground, it might grow a little bit. Whatever grows, it's not considered kilayim that I put something to grow in with a vine. That would be crossbreeding. It's not, you're not obligated to maser, to bring tithes on the little part that grew. And it's not asur mishum shvi'it. If you did that on Shnat Shemitah, you wouldn't, where you're supposed to let the ground go fallow. You're not allowed to work the land at all. That's not considered working the land. You didn't try to grow it. You were just putting it under the ground. It was already, right? This isn't a seed that you're planting and it's growing. So that's not an issue. But here, and that has nothing to do with whether the leaves are revealed or not. But when it comes to muktzah and Shabbat, if miktzat alav megulin, if some of the leaves are revealed, then nitalim b'Shabbat. You can basically, even if the whole thing is under the ground, but the leaves are out, you pull the leaves, it pulls them out of the ground. So what if tons of dirt gets moved? That's what we call tiltul min hatzad. You're not doing it, you're doing it, right? Tiltul min hatzad means you're moving one thing and it's causing something else to move. That's indirect. You're allowed to do that. So therefore, if that's the case, even if this basin has a rim and it's under the ground, it shouldn't matter when you pick it up. Okay, remember, why are we trying to do this? We want to say, how could it be that Rav, I have to remember who said it, that Rav Yechiel said that if you put this basin upside down by your wall, this succeeds in making the wall accessible. But why? Isn't this something movable on Shabbat? So we keep trying to figure out a way, but it's not movable. In the end, it is movable because even, right, it's not forbidden to move this on Shabbat. You can even pull it out of the ground. So finally, the Gemara answers, Lo tzricha debai mara v'chatzina. It's a case where you buried it so well into the ground that you would need a hoe or a spade to lift it up. Then already, it's going to be forbidden for you to do that because of chofer. You're basically digging a hole. That's a toladah of cholesh. So and basically that's going to be a problem of cholesh. You're going to be basically plowing the land. It's a toladah of plowing. And that's why we're going to assume that this basin's going to work only in a case where the only way it could work is if it were buried in the ground so seriously that you would need a hoe or a spade to dig it up. Okay, moving on to our next case. Sulam hamitzli eino mema'et. Now we get to a type of ladder, but hatsuri mema'et, two different types of ladders, a mitzli and a tsuri. Now, you might think they know what they're talking about, but in fact, the Gemara is going to say, hechidami sulam hamitzli. What is the difference between these two ladders? So sulam hamitzli, amar debei Rabbi Yanai, kol she'ein bo arba'a chavakim. It doesn't have 4 rungs. Okay, you see this one? It only has 3 rungs. And Rashi says, okay, you can look in Rashi inside, or you can look on the side here. It brings the Rashi here. Rashi says, Ho'il v'katan, right? In Dibor Matchil Sulam HaMitzri, it's the second narrow line in Rashi. Ho'il v'katan hu v'noach litzlo misham eino mema'et. Because it's so small and light, we're going to assume that doesn't make the wall any more accessible, even though theoretically you could climb on this wall. This is just like we suggested with the previous case. It can be moved, and once it can be moved, it's a problem, right? So Sulam HaMitzri eino mema'et, and the Tsuri is mema'et. So now they ask, Amalei Rav Acha Berei de Rav Ale Rav Ashi. My time at Sulam HaMitzri de lo mema'et. He says, what's the reason? So Amalei, Lo shmialach, did you not hear? Right? It's not maybe the nicest way to answer someone, but what, don't you know? Hada amar Rav Acha bar Ada, amar Rav Hamnuna amar Rav. Didn't you hear Rav Acha said the name of Rav Hamnuna, said the name of Rav? Mishum dahave le davar shenital b'Shabbat. Exactly as I explained before. It's something that's movable on Shabbat. V'chol davar nital b'Shabbat eino mema'et. And anything that gets moved on Shabbat doesn't mean, it doesn't make your wall any more accessible. I mean, it's only accessible while it's there, but it might be moved, and then your wall isn't necessarily accessible for all of Shabbat. Ihachi, so then they ask, afilu tsurinami, so a tsuri also is movable. So what do they answer? Hatam kovdo kovo. No, there it has more than 3 rungs, and it's obviously much heavier. And because it's so heavy, that makes it in its place. Now, there's interesting 2 explanations of why the weight of it should affect it. So one answer is to say, basically, we consider that firmly established because it's heavy. It's likely that people aren't going to move it, okay? And this has to do with human behavior. It's likely no one's going to move it, and because no one's going to move it, therefore, we assume that that's going to be not really davar nital b'Shabbat because people generally don't move it. But the Ravid says, no, in order for something to be nital b'Shabbat or not nital b'Shabbat, it has to be halachically not movable on Shabbat. And what does he claim? Because it's so heavy, you can't move it. It's not allowed to move on Shabbat. I'll give you a good example. Like I can move a table on Shabbat. Right? It's not so heavy. Again, depends on the table. But you can generally move tables on Shabbat. But if you had a piano and you wanted to move that on Shabbat, that would be forbidden. That's muktzah. You can't move that on Shabbat. It's very heavy. Because it's so heavy, people generally don't move it. That makes it forbidden to move on Shabbat. So that's what they're saying. That's what the Ravid says halachically. Whereas the first opinion, which is the majority of the opinion of most of the poskim say, most of the commentaries say that it's really because it's unlikely you're going to move it. Okay. And then it's based on human behavior rather than based on halacha. Okay. Now, as I promised you, we're going to kind of move a little bit into not just, until now we kept saying it's mima'ed in terms of, do I have access to the top of the wall? Can I use it? Because remember, the Mishnah said, once it's 10 tefachim high, it's not accessible to me. Right? As long if it's 4 tefachim wide, or maybe if it's right, even if it's not so accessible. Therefore, I can't carry things onto there. But there's also an issue of, is this a wall that separates between 2 people? So if it separates between our 2 courtyards, then we can't make an eruv. However, if we make it very accessible for me to get to your courtyard and for you to get to my courtyard, then we can actually make an eruv together, even though we have a 10 tefachim wall. So that's Abaye. Abaye says, and you could probably say that Abaye is talking about both situations, but he seems to be really talking about accessibility from both sides. And therefore it seems to be, even though they don't exactly say it explicitly in the Gemara, that they're switching a little bit of topic and they're talking about accessibility for the idea of making an eruv altogether. Amar Abaye, kotel sheben shtei chatzerot, gavoa 10 tvachim, v'iniach sulam rachav 4 mikan, v'sulam rachav 4 mikan. We're going to keep seeing that with a ladder. It has to be 4 tvachim wide for it to be called a ladder. Anything less than that is not very easy to climb on, and it's not going to be considered a ladder. So if I have a ladder that's 4 wide, and it goes, right, and mine goes up to the top of the wall, and yours goes up on top of the wall, and ein ben zeh lezeh 3 tvachim, but in between our 2 ladders are 3 tvachim next to it, within 3 tvachim of each other. Go back to laws of Levud, remember? It's as if they're right next to each other, which means that I can easily get up my ladder and down your ladder. That means that your courtyard is accessible to me. That means that we can make an eruv. That's mima'et. But shlosha, if it's 3 or more separate, well, then I know mima'et because I can't easily get to your side. But now they narrow this. That's what you can see on the chart on the sheet. There's a narrowing the focus of this halacha. It's only if the kotel isn't 4 wide. But if the top of the wall is 4 wide, then, okay, go back to my bezek guy. Once it's wide enough, even if they're very separated from each other. I can't remember if there's a picture. Yeah, here's the picture. If I have a ladder on one side of the wall and you have a ladder on the other side much further down, and the wall is 4 tvachim wide, then everyone can climb on the wall, right? We're not assuming that we suggested maybe earlier, people are scared to walk on a wall. Once it's 4 tvachim wide, people walk. So the fact that my ladder is all the way to the left and yours is all the way to the right, it doesn't matter. They're still accessible one to the other. I could get into your courtyard, you could get into mine, in which case Abaye would agree in this case that even though they're more than 3 tvachim apart from each other, still we're going to allow this to connect us. And therefore we can make an eruv. Amra baby barabai. Okay, two last cases, which are basically parallel cases, just talking a little bit about different things. We're going to first mention an itztiba. An itztiba is some sort of stand or wooden piece that juts out from the wall. Maybe it's connected to the wall, maybe it's not connected to the wall, just on the ground. But we'll see. Itztiba gabe itztiba. Let's bana itztiba gabe itztiba. If you built something one on top of the other, in a little itztiba here. If the bottom one has 4 tfachim, again, machloket Rashi Tosfot, this picture shows Rashi, where it's 4 just up against the wall. It's a rectangle. Tosfot said it would have to be 4 by 4 wide. The whole question is, once it's 4, the issue is it's already easily accessible that you can step on it. If you can step on it, then it lowers the height of the wall. Inami, or, so that would be mima'et. Inami, or, if there's one right on top of the other, the bottom one, this is the next picture, isn't 4 wide, but the one above it, yesh ba'elyona arba'a, ve'ein bein ze lezeh shlosha, and there's less than 3 in between. If there's more than 3, then the upper one doesn't really affect you because you're not going to climb on something so high up. But if you have easy access and it's within 3 of the bottom one, then it's considered levud, as if the bottom one is 4 tvachim wide, then it would work to be mamei. But if it's higher than that, then the fact that it's 4 wide and it's in the middle of that wall doesn't make that wall any shorter because you can't really climb on it. And same thing, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Ravu. Remember I said that the ladder has to be 4 tvachim wide for it to be usable. But now we're going to say, Sulam sheshlivotav porchot. It's a debate about what it means, shlivotav porchot. If you see here on the picture in 258, they put on the side, sheyesh avir bein shlivotav kesulam shelanu. A sulam porachat is basically a ladder like we have, which means it jumps from one to the other, each rung, as opposed to a ladder that's designed like steps. Right? Some people have those kind of ladders that are step-like. Some people think it means something different. Okay, it's a matter of, do you think all their ladders were like ours, or maybe they had different kinds of ladders, and this is defining a particular type, which is the one that we use. So let's just assume it's like ours. So because shlivotav porchot, im yesh b'shliva tachtonah, if the bottom one is 4 wide, arba'a, then already it will mean the wall is less than 10, and we can use the wall. Inami im b'shliva tachtonah arba, or you could say the bottom one isn't 4. This is the picture on the right hand, on the left hand side, where the bottom one isn't 4, but yesh b'shliva ha'elyona 4, but the top one is 4 wide, and ein bein ze lezeh shlosha, and each rung is within 3 tvachim of the other one. That's going to basically consider it as if the bottom one is 4 tvachim wide, and that will, again, bring down the height of your wall. And therefore, again, for issues of, number 1, accessibility to carry, and maybe also accessibility in terms of both sides having access, again, for both sides to make an eruv, you would have to have access like Abaye's case on both sides, where each one has this on either side, and then the wall, the sides become accessible. But if you're talking about carrying, so this side, we only care about one side, let's say, so this side can carry because it's accessible to them, it's less than 10 tvachim. So we dealt with 2 issues. One is carrying up to the wall, and then we also had carrying on the wall, although that wasn't really the issue the Gemara was dealing with, it's carrying up to the wall. Once you carry up to the wall, you can obviously carry on the wall. And the other was about making an eruv between. Can you make an eruv, or is this wall basically blocking access? And it's all about the topic of accessibility. Okay, we'll stop here for today. Have a good day, everybody. Shavua tov.